We have talked about story structures previously, and really we've only scratched the surface. There are so many ways to plot out a narrative, and today we want to go over a few more styles and their benefits.
I want to assure you that studying story structure doesn't require you to be an outline writer. There are many discovery writers that use these story structures, but they use them in revision rather than in the beginning when they're doing their outlining. The first one we are going to be looking at is this promise and payoff structure, but colloquially it's known as just the Sanderson structure. And as the name would imply, Brandon Sanderson is the biggest name that uses it. If you want to see examples of stories that use very similar structures, you can look at Shield of Sparrows, or you can look at Will White's Cradle series, and a variation of it in even J.K. Rowling's writing. Unlike more strict structures where you have to be worried about things like the call to adventure or the refusal of the call, all that this structure focuses on is three things: promises, progress, and payoff. Promises are just the subtle promise you make to your audience of what's going to happen. Progress is the observable advancement to the goal. And then the payoff is the big bombastic scene that rewards your audience for getting through the book. In one of his lessons, he actually gives this example. He has this scene where he wants a character to get out of handcuffs and escape. He writes the scene out and then he goes, how can I prove to the audience that this is something that logically happened? I will show 3 instances throughout my story structure of this person trying and failing or learning how to escape from handcuffs. And then he will do that for every single endpoint that he wants, whether that's a romance scene, a big sacrifice by the mentor, or a reveal about the magic system. Then when he's writing a scene, he'll pluck the different beats he will need to have for that particular scene. For example, scene 1 could be beat 1 of handcuffs, beat 1 of romance, and then scene 2 will have beat 1 of mentor and beat 2 of handcuffs, and so on until near the end when all of the payoffs explode into this huge Sanderlanche that we know and love. Now that's at its most basic. He obviously does lots of other things to make his stories great. A lot of the lifeblood of this promise payoff structure is a lot of just the basic tenets of foreshadowing.
Salvation lies within.
But you're doing it for almost every single arc in your story rather than just one big moment at the end of your story. This is how I think you can avoid one of the big downsides of this Sanderlanche structure. And it's this idea of having nothing but setup and then a huge explosion at the end. Early books by Sarah J. Maas and even early books by Brandon Sanderson, I think, fall into this. But if you have these small reveals or huge character changes, that allows you to get pulled through this. And it's also promising that there's an even bigger surprise at the end of the story. Brandon Sanderson talks about this where he basically outlines his big books as 3 or 4 smaller books within to stop himself from instinctually doing this. One of the big benefits of this story structure is you can have this huge web of different subplots and different foreshadowing things going on all at once, and all of them can make a lot of sense because you are proving to the audience that these things are logical. You would be very surprised at how far you can push an audience suspension of disbelief if you just allow to have these logical steps to push you forward.
Now, the Snowflake method is dear to my heart because I have used it as a discovery writer to do some rough plotting for multiple narratives that I've made. It was developed by Randy Ingermanson and Josh Vogt, the writer of the Pathfinder Tales. He also uses this method for all of his works. So at its core, it has you alternate between plot and character, the ultimate goal being to weave the two together while hitting familiar elements found in a story. You start with a 1-sentence summary. This acts like a pitch, a proof of concept. Then the next step is a 5-sentence summary. This would be a single paragraph outline. You aim to set up at least 3 conflicts that have resolutions. The next step is character sheets for every major character. You make goals, motivations, turning points. The 4th step is a 1-page synopsis. So you create a paragraph for each of the 5 sentences from the 2nd step to create a whole page of the complete narrative. So you can start to see how a snowflake would form, where you start with that 1 sentence as the core, and then you create 5 sentences out from that core. Then finally you create a map. List out every scene from the 1 page that you made, and you define which POV is in each of these scenes, and then you try to summarize each scene. This is where you can also add some really cool details that help keep track of things. It'd be really good for plotting out exactly when something could happen, or if there's a time jump, or if you're in different locations even. And so this could be really useful to build that out, but still have the freedom to discovery, right? I think I used this a lot looser than what Randy did here. I had a rough idea of the ending, but really I was concerned with what is going on in this scene, what sentences can be built out from that, and then build the world alongside that, but strictly necessary to what was going on in those sentences and nothing beyond that.
The third structure that we'll be looking at is called the 7-point story structure. It was popularized by Dan Wells, but a variation of it is what Larry Brooks, who wrote Story Engineering, uses. At its most basic, it has 7 points that a story can use as a basic skeleton: the hook, the plot turn 1, the pinch 1, the midpoint, the pinch 2, the plot turn 2, and then the resolution. So the hook is introducing the starting state of your character. The plot turn 1 is setting the story into motion. The hero's journey calls this the call to adventure. The pinch adds pressure that forces the character to act. The midpoint is where the main character goes from reactive to proactive.
That's what's under the trapdoor. The Sorcerer's Stone.
The pinch 2 is another significant failure. In a lot of stories, this is like the point of no return. Plot turn 2 is usually how the character believes that they're going to win. And then the resolution is this huge climax that we talked about before, this ending that you're working towards. Very similar to the Sanderland structure, this is a way to logically stair-step from your beginning to your ending. The creators of South Park have this really, really interesting lesson where they talk about this concept in writing, that if you write out all of your plot beats and you say and then between any of them, your story has broken pieces in it. Every story beat in your narrative should have therefore between them. This happens, therefore this happens. This forces you as a writer to make sure that all of the things that are happening are logical progressions of the last thing that happened. This is the mentality behind both the Sanderland structure and the 7-point story structure. Having logical steps, proving to your audience that your character really did therefore go from the beginning to the end of their journey. The last thing that's really interesting about 7-point story structure is it has a exceptional amount of symmetry when you look at it. The hook and the resolution basically ask who was this character and who did they become. Both of the pinch points ask what is the conflict. The plot turns 1 and 2 basically ask why did the journey start and why does it end. Looking at this symmetry can help you develop a lot of this latter half of the book that a lot of writers have a really difficult time coming to.
This next one I'm talking about is the story circle, popularized by Dan Harmon. He is most known for Community and Rick and Morty. This is essentially a simplified hero's journey. This is chiefly concerned though with theme and proper story progression, where it wants to lock in where these story beats are occurring and how much time has passed in between them. So you can apply this method to loads of famous stories like The Wizard of Oz or Iron Man, and you'll see that when I apply it to Toy Story, specifically the third one. It was written primarily by Michael Arndt. If you want to learn more about Arndt post Toy Story 3, we'll link his lecture below, but he talks at length about the mistakes and lessons he learned while making the script. And so I'll hit on a few of the useful points from that lecture, but check out the full thing. I highly recommend it if you want to learn a lot of cool nuggets of wisdom for writing and what you can learn about your process. With the very first one, You, this is just the toys' place in the world. They were loved and enjoyed by Andy. It gives you a nice memory montage. Then the next is Need. They have a lost relevance. So Andy's going off to college and they haven't been played with for years. Next is Go, the toys minus Woody. They believe that Andy wanted to throw them away rather than put them in the attic. And so they change their plans and decide to jump into the donations box. So this becomes the inciting incident. Arndt says that this needs to be the character's worst fears come true. He also says that sometimes you have to reverse engineer the plot because characters will never willingly submit to the worst outcome. And so he actually had to come up with, I want them to be in the garbage. How do I get them there? So I'm just gonna jump to that plot point and then figure out later how they got there. Next comes the search. And so the toys, they try out the Sunnyside daycare. It appears nice when in fact it's miserable because Lotso runs the town there. And here is where Woody's arc is different from the rest of them. He leaves before the children arrive, and so he is independent from them. He doesn't know that the daycare is bad. And so it creates this own agency for him rather than Lotso, the antagonist, that would drive the story. Then we hit the find piece, which is the midpoint. The toys then regret leaving Andy and they want to return to him. So Arndt says that if you change the goal for a character, you must introduce a new obstacle for that character. In this example, it's Jesse. when she's looking for Buzz, who they sent off to go talk to Lotso, and they can't find him. They then discover that Andy didn't want to throw them away, and so she goes, okay, we need to go home. Their objective has now changed. Buzz is going to be now a new antagonist that will stop them from that goal. Next is take, and this is when that prison break scene happens. Usually with this piece, there's cost to the success, and usually it's something grim or bad. In this case, it's potentially death for the toys. That theme of family comes full circle. Then we have return. The toys are saved and they were returned to Andy's room. And then finally we end with change. This is where what Arndt calls the hero's epiphany. So rather than live in the attic, Woody has learned that his family is no longer Andy, but actually it's all the toys. He willingly stays behind with the toys rather than go off to college with Andy. The last thing to say about the story circle is not all stories are going to work with this method. It may not lean into some of these heavier, maybe science fiction, fantasy type stories where there's a lot of branching paths. Just remember that this is a form of the hero's journey. So if this is the story you want to tell, lean into that.
Now, story structures can be very, very helpful to writers, especially when you're a little bit lost about where you want your payoffs to be or where you want your endings or your plot beats to happen. But even the most stringent users of outlines like Brandon Sanderson approaches a story with his outline, but he allows his characters to follow their own path. The outline cannot be the end-all be-all, otherwise the story will suffer because of it. Have this structure if it helps you, but allow yourself to deviate from it if it makes the story better.
A lot of us are naturally going to be more plotters or more discovery writers. I can't change that I'm a discovery writer. I feel like I write better that way. So I'm going to take these and look at what's good about them, and there's some pieces that I might take away from them, and then apply those to how I discovery write. I got a lot out of just dissecting Toy Story, and it was a really good time. I don't ever want to write a story like that though. So I may take some of the examples that Arndt gave and look at how can I inject that into my story to keep it on track or to keep it fresh. At the end of the day, look at these examples that have worked, whether it's a Pixar film or some other narrative, take inspiration from them and see where it takes you. So that'll about do it from us. We will see you next time.
Hey guys, if you really like this video, check the one down below. You might like that one too.
And if you really like what you see, click here to subscribe.